Ikaga desu ka? Watanabe dan desu. On today's episode of Hollywood Rants, Tale of the North Hollywood Curmudgeon, we're going to be going over Denial is Not Just a River in Egypt, talking about what's going on with the entertainment industry, and once again, where I believe that there are certain very, very large mistakes taking place because many in the industry refuse to read their tea leaves, or having read their tea leaves are saying, I'm going to continue getting mine until this entire house burns down. The reason I'm saying that is because so many of the decisions are coming home to roost in a negative way, and yet the behavior of the executives doesn't seem to have changed at all. Let's start with Netflix. Earlier this week, Netflix put out an article that was describing how they are going to remain being a one-product company, that they know that they have this particular niche in the market and it will keep growing. And they don't want to become too diversified. They don't want to go off in too many directions. In that self-same article, they start talking about how they're branching into gaming and into e-commerce. I mean, what is wrong with PR people? If you start with a thesis statement and you're going to be published as an exclusive in Variety, that means that no one is going to even proofread what you wrote. They will just publish it as is. So do not be inconsistent in your very own reporting. I know that most people don't read below the headline and maybe the first two sentences, but when you're dealing with venture capital, when you're dealing with a company that is underperforming expectation, then you're going to get into trouble. And let's take a look at some of the numbers that have come out just this quarter. First of all, Netflix continues to be fairly strong in the United States. In Canada, with nearly 75 million subscribers between those two countries. Now, here's a challenge to all of that. This number is decreasing, and yet it is by far Netflix's larger number. So they have to be careful because their work product is increasing. Note that they hired they promoted two new executives, Kira Goldberg and Ori Marmor. And I'm sorry if I murdered both of their names, but these are two executives who have fairly decent track records, who have been with Netflix for a while and have been tasked with increasing their output to 70 feature films per year. Now, this would make sense if Netflix was starting to expand its reach and move into the world of, let's say, feature films with theatrical windows. That would be a merger or an acquisition or an expansion of their business that would make sense. Because unlike burying a movie on Netflix, where it just becomes another part of their ever-increasing, less exciting library, it would have a chance to be a breakout hit and bring in far more cash than it could ever get in terms of new subscribers, particularly since we are now seeing a decline in the United States. That being said, Netflix's second biggest market is Europe, which has nearly 70 million subscribers. That's very good. That number has remained fairly steady over time. It at least has not gone down the way the United States did. The second market, the third market is Latin America. And Latin America is very solid. There's nearly 40 million subscribers coming out of Latin America. So that's pretty healthy. And so that's also, though, remained relatively consistent. Their biggest growth market in the past 2 years has been Asia. And while Netflix touts their increase in Asia, that number has gone from approximately 7 million in 2018 to approximately a little bit under 30 million now. And here's the problem. Asia was supposed to be an area of explosive growth, where there was supposed to be many, many more subscribers. After all, the size of the middle class population, not the total population, but the middle class population of China is as large as the entire population of the United States and Western Europe put together. So that's a fairly substantial market, and we can see why, even though it's ridiculous, Netflix and many of the Hollywood studios have been thinking they don't even need to pay attention to the United States or Europe because China is such an enormous market. We'll be exploring in a moment why that was really stuck on stupid. But anyway, the Chinese market is not growing, nor is the Japanese market, nor is the South Korean market at anywhere near the rate it was supposed to grow. Remember, the Asian nations are a much larger proportion of the world's population than the Caucasian nations. So this is indeed something that Netflix needs to be very worried about. On the plus side, one of the good things that's coming out of Goldberg and Marmer is that they want to make their movies appealing to the United States market, appealing to the feature film market in general, not going off on tangents of diversity or art films that for some reason cost $75 million, but are budgeted according to what they feel their audience is going to be. This is a sign that they're moving towards some form of fiscal responsibility, which is something Netflix has never had. I'm assuming that one of the reasons that they released this article saying that they're a one company business, while at the same time throwing out there that they're going into these expansion slots of gaming and e-commerce, is because they are indeed up for sale. They are looking for someone to come in and be at the very least an angel investor. I'm going to suspect that after decades of being a favorite of the Wall Street hedge funds, that there's some hesitation right now because Netflix is clearly not going to be on a growth spurt in any of its markets anytime in the near future. So this idea that you can just spend and spend and spend and keep getting more and more and more revenue coming in is coming up against the brutal wall of reality. And because of that, I'm going to suspect that if Netflix doesn't turn its fortune around or find an angel investor or someone to partner with, that it is in fact going to start become challenged because of its debt. And this is something that could really impact them. We do know that their obsession with that new reality show about furries is largely in response to the fact that they need to bring in eyeballs, whether it's through cheap notoriety, like a reality series is, and I'm not knocking reality shows, they definitely have their place, or whether it's through going back to their basics and stop it with the expensive art films. Note I said expensive art films. I'm not saying anything about art films that are reasonably budgeted. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when you are spending money as if you are making a Marvel movie when you actually have only a tertiary audience as its outcome. That's a problem. And please remember that Netflix's primary audience is largely urban and largely Caucasian. It is way overrepresented in the Caucasian and urban demographic, in fact. If I was Netflix, I would be looking to expand my home base. I would be looking to reach out to other areas of the United States that they have not conquered. Unfortunately, those parts of the market that they have not conquered are parts of the market that they have convinced themselves they don't want. This is a very foolish move, but it is not necessarily an uncommon one. Even Wall Street, or Madison Avenue, which was known to be able to sell anything to anyone, has recently been retreating and having to pull and focusing on ever increasingly small markets at the loss of their main markets, and then looking sad and trying to go back and fix things. I do not understand the mindset that alienating your core buyers is in any way a positive business prospect. Moving on from Netflix, let's go to Warner Brothers. Now we know that Warner Brothers is in the process of being bought by Discovery. And because let's face it, AT&T spent $85 billion for an asset that they thought was a very, very forward-moving one, only to discover after the fact. Now I'll admit that when the deal was signed, Joker was a top box office hit, and Game of Thrones still had another season. So nobody knew just how fakakta Warner Brothers would make their future DC Universe movies, and how they would mess up Game of Thrones and kill that asset. I know, they're going to do another pilot for a prequel. I think the bloom is off the rose. I hope I'm wrong. But we're already seeing trouble there. And that trouble was exacerbated recently by the release of Space Jam. Now, this LeBron James rehash of the Michael Jordan Warner Brothers cartoon film seemed like it was something that should work, because the original had its fans, and it definitely, a lot of those fans are now parents and are nostalgic on that original. So what went wrong with this? Well, what went wrong with this is Warner Brothers' penchant that goes along very much with Disney's of alienating their core audience, of insulting them and making it seem like their core audience was somehow a bunch of losers. This, again, is not a way to get further viewers. Now, I do know that this movie was debuting on Netflix, so perhaps it was Warner instead of HBO Max. So it's possible that Warner Brothers didn't care about its messaging at this point, because they weren't going to benefit directly from a new subscriber base. Oh, by the way, Warner Brothers did increase its subscriber base by nearly 3 million during the past quarter, so that's good. They have almost 50 million subscribers total, which is still way below what they were supposed to have, but whatever, at least they were going in the correct direction. And they still have most of Europe and the now no longer quite so lustrous looking Orient to be further areas of growth, saying especially that Discovery figures out how to stop the insane bleeding. One of the things that HBO Max has announced is, just like Netflix talking about their new roster of films, I mean 70 in Netflix, Warner Brothers will be creating 10 new movies that are to have their concurrent day and date release with the theatrical on HBO Max, but for no additional charge. This is actually, I think, a not bad move. I think it's still a mistake to have such a limited window, a day and date co-release. And I have a sneaky suspicion that as we get closer to some of these movies being done, that there might be a retrenchment on that, and that a lot of these films will be released theatrically. In fact, HBO Max has mentioned that in passing, that they're going to shorten the window. It's only going to be 45 days. And I'm like, guys, what are you doing? Why are you decreasing the length of this window? Because most movies tend to build an audience by word of mouth. The shorter you make the windows, the more likely it is people will just say, I'll wait, no matter how, unless the response is so enthusiastic, so above the norm in terms of excellence and definite recommends, people feel heat to see it now. Please, it was bad enough when you decreased the window from 6 months to 90 days. Now you're shortening that in half. This is bad thinking. And I know that you talk to each other on Twitter, and you live in this little bubble, and you go to the same cocaine and canopy parties and discuss all this stuff and pat yourselves on the back for how smart you are. And then you see numbers that come in and you look sad. And you don't really worry, because you don't give a shit, because you're usually the son or daughter of someone who's already in the industry and has a lot of money, so you got a trust fund. But the rest of the people in the industry still, the other 310,000 people who are employed by Hollywood do not necessarily have your trust fund, and do rely on this industry remaining healthy. So please cool it. The other, so I'm going to say that at least Warner has a chance with Discovery and its responsibility. However, I am also seeing that the current people in charge, probably feeling that they're not going to keep their jobs, are certainly doing a good job to burn down the house on their way out. And I'm going to hope that I'm wrong on that, but it looks like they're just determined to take what they can and get the hell out of Dodge, taking as much of the loot of the company with them. There's other things that are going on that are kind of interesting in the world, and that is all of the production of the TV networks, the traditional networks, admittedly not doing as well as we would like them to do, but you know, these are old technologies. We're talking about an industry that's been around for 75 years, so it has to have gone through changes, and the Nielsen's have been there as sort of the bogey, so you know kind of what the regular audience is, so advertisers are going to have a good sense of where their money is going and why it's good. In fact, right now should be a very good time because during the upfronts, where the pre-buys are made for the next season, a lot of money from Madison Avenue went in. Now, is this because Madison Avenue is as fakakta, as I mentioned earlier, or is this because at least some of the old guard are appreciating what a TV audience means to ad dollars as opposed to an online audience for ad dollars? We know that online ad dollars are really worthless. They have kind of this bling of being current and advanced, but in reality, they're not nearly as good on the cost per thousands. And in fact, some of Madison Avenue was even floating the idea that NFL rates should be able to go up this year. I don't know why they thought that. Last year was a very disastrous year, but they're still thinking that this is now one of the only shows that has this type of solid guaranteed audience. Certainly the Academy Awards has lost its position as number 2. In the past 15 or 16 years, their overall audience in the Academy Awards has dropped from you know, a very nice almost over 50 million to 100 million viewers down to less than 10. While the Super Bowl has maintained its position as the #1 show on the air. But if it has the same kind of challenges that we saw hit Jeep Cherokee last year with its disastrous Bruce Springsteen ad, I'm going to say that an increase in ad dollars is going to look like it was a mistake. Nonetheless, I do agree to some degree that at least sports programming gets your guaranteed male eyeballs, because this is something that cannot be on a delay or on a stream later. You really want to see the programming in real time, and therefore any embedded ads are going to be going to be at a premium. But going into sports, let's now talk about what's going on with the Olympics. NBC, I don't know how much push they had in the Japanese diet, because one of the challenges with the Olympics was the fact that Japan did not get its act together as far as the COVID vaccines were concerned. And that meant you had people coming in from other countries who had to be vaccinated, who had to be quarantined, while the Japanese population wasn't even allowed to attend the games ultimately. Now, this problem seems to have been alleviated, but it was too little too late. And that plus NBC, being the US progenitor of the Olympics, did something that I know was not intended to be bad. And this is going to sound like I'm indulging in the world of microaggressions while I make fun of other people who do it, but I'm going to mention it anyway. When you look at the way NBC wrote the word Tokyo on their ads, it's in that same Fu Manchu style, La Choy Chinese food swing American foxtail-like font that looks like a brushstroke. At the very least, I would think that if you're going to make it try to look like Japanese brush or Asian brushstrokes, make it look like an Asian brushstroke. Not have the way you write the brushstroke be so completely wrong. And while people are saying, Dan, you're being overly sensitive, if you did this to other countries, such as India or Africa, and made fun of their style of writing, because that's what this is. This is the style of writing that's been used since the Yellow Peril days. And it's the style of writing that was used in the 50s with stuff like Sayonara. And so why are we still seeing this type of Asian exoticism being played while every other ethnicity is being reverenced and not being made into a joke? Anyway, the Nielsen's are being challenged by the networks for having for being the only source of ratings news. And in fact, a lot of the networks are asking that they be de-accredited. Why? Because they're giving you bad news? Because they're telling you that you're alienating audiences? So you want someone to give you good news that doesn't have anything to do with reality? I think so. I think that, again, as part of the overall denial of reality that's facing the industry, that this is just another example of it. You don't like the response someone gives you, say that they're wrong. And we've seen that happen more recently with the release of Masters of the Universe and with Kevin Smith downright lying and saying that this was a recreation of the 1981 TV version and that it was going to be really pleasing to fans, and disavowing certain scoops that were coming out online that pointed out that no, He-Man was going to become She-Woman, and that the show was going to be canted like so many other Mary Sue type programs where you have the perfect female and the loser males. And sure enough, that's what happened. And now you have Kevin Smith attacking his audience and blaming them and saying, well, I don't even care what they say because Netflix has assured me that everybody is loving the show and that these small numbers of people don't count. Can we say this is the same BS that was coming out of Disney for I don't know how long over the Star Wars sequels? And look what happened there. Hollywood has got to stop it with this type of just making it up and then getting angry when the response is the opposite of what their propaganda is. You cannot fix a problem if you will not look at it. And Hollywood's refusal to look at the real truth of what is happening is one of the biggest challenges. Going back to the LeBron James movie, let's face it, the fact that China said, we're not taking it, came as a shock to everyone. Why? Because LeBron James made a big show of being anti-Hong Kong protests and a big show pretty much telling the American public to shut up. And so now that there's a consequence, he's looking very sad. Now that he has a failure, or at least a major disappointment on his hands, what's he going to do? Now we have another loss there. So my sense is that Hollywood needs to pay attention to its domestic audience, not just look for China to bail them out of everything so they can keep on with bad business practices. Number two, focus on an audience you are gapping in the United States, which is basically anything that's not a coastal urban audience. Number three, look to do content that is indeed innovative and cheap. because that will help the bottom line ultimately and help the industry recover from the past quarter century of Wall Street dominance in taking away what true content is and focusing it all on the PowerPoint side of the industry. Not saying you don't need a PowerPoint side, but it doesn't need to be dominant. Because after all, people go to the movies because they are buying emotions. They're buying that chance to dream together in the dark with others. And that's why they love the movies. That's why the movies have been so popular over time. And that is why I want to see this industry succeed.